What if everything you believe about God and money is backwards? In this video, I'm going to present to you evidence that your financial situation is the direct result of whether you've been operating within God's blueprint or outside it. I'm Papa Charlie. School's in session. There once was a wealthy man, so wealthy that he was said to have owned all the cattle on 1,000 hills. This man had a gift for seeing value where others didn't. One day, he came across an operating vineyard in a foreign country that was producing well below its potential. So he bought it. The property was already established, the vines were mature, the infrastructure was in place, the land was fertile, and the climate ideal. Everything needed to produce an exceptional vintage was already there. What it did need was someone who knew how to maximize its production. The landowner had heard about a vintner, a man who had spent his entire career understanding vineyards. He knew the soil, he knew the seasons, he knew the difference between a vine that needed pruning and one that needed patience. He knew how to tend and keep an operation like this one and make it produce at its highest level. So the landowner made him an offer. "Come run my vineyard," he said. "Live in the estate house on the property. Everything the vineyard produces is available to you. I've invested in the property, so you don't have to start from scratch. Your job is simply to tend it and keep it, and do that well." The vintner looked at what was being offered, a thriving operation, a beautiful property, a paradise of sorts. He said yes. The vintner settled into the estate house and toured the property. The more he explored, the more impressed he became. This wasn't just a good vineyard, it was an exceptional one. The landowner hadn't exaggerated when he described its potential. Within a few weeks, he had a routine. Early mornings in the vineyard, checking the vines, managing the crew, making the decisions that kept the operation running at its best. Afternoons, reviewing production numbers and planning the next season. It was exactly the kind of work he was built for. One afternoon, the landowner came to walk the property with him. When they finished the tour, they sat down in the office and the landowner gestured toward the two computers on the desk. "Let me show you how we're set up here," he said. He pointed to the first one. "This is the vineyard system. Everything you need to run this operation is in here. Sales records, inventory, vendor contracts, production data, payroll, the financial accounts for the vineyard. All of it is yours to access and use however you see fit. This computer is your tool. Use it well." Then he pointed to the second one. "This one is mine. It contains my personal business data, information about my other holdings, my investment strategy, my broader financial picture. It's not connected to the vineyard system. This one is off limits." He said it without apology and without explanation, not as a threat, just as a fact. Everything you need to do your job well is on the first computer. What's on this one operates at a level this assignment doesn't require you to access. The vintner nodded. It was a reasonable boundary from a man who had just handed him a paradise. The first season went well. Production was up. The vineyard was running the way the landowner had envisioned when he bought it. The vintner knew his craft, and it showed in the numbers. The landowner came back to review the season's results and to put the next phase of his plan in place. Experience told him that this level of growth would require a new level of management, more than one person could reasonably be expected to handle alone. The vintner was excellent at what he did, but the full scope of what the vineyard could become required a different kind of thinking alongside his, someone who could take what he produced and deploy it in ways that multiplied its reach beyond what either the vineyard or the vintner could access alone. Where to reinvest the profits, how to position for the next season, which vendors to lock into long-term contracts and which ones to keep flexible, whether to expand the operation or consolidate what was already working. The landowner knew instinctively that it wasn't good for the man to be working alone. "Tell me about your wife," the landowner said. The vintner looked up from the production report. "What would you like to know?" "I've heard she's very good with numbers." "Yes, she's a CPA," the vintner said, "and one of the best investors I know." The landowner leaned back in his chair and smiled. I'd like to bring her on as your partner in this little venture of ours. The vintner's wife came to the vineyard the following week. She walked the property with her husband, asked several questions, and within a few days had a clear picture of where the operation stood and where it could go. She set up her workstation at the vineyard computer and got to work. She reviewed the operation's revenue streams and saw diversification opportunities. She analyzed the vendor contracts and renegotiated 2 of them, reducing costs without sacrificing quality. She identified an adjacent property that the vineyard's earnings could support acquiring and presented the landowner with the proposal that doubled the operation's long-term potential. She wasn't just helping her husband do his job, she was doing hers, and the overall increase was something that could only be called miraculous. Her addition didn't just double production, it increased it tenfold. The vintner tended and kept. He knew the vines, the soil, the seasons, the crew. That was his assignment, and he was excellent at it. His wife strategized, deployed, and multiplied. She knew the numbers, the markets, the opportunities, and the risks. That was her assignment, and she was exceptional at it. Together, they covered the full scope of what the landowner had always known this vineyard could become. 2 partners with 2 distinct skill sets and a wise landowner who had designed it this way from the beginning. Neither of them was the other's assistant. Neither of them was the other's subordinate. They were comparable partners in the truest sense, each one essential, each one irreplaceable, each one adding exponentially to the other's efforts. The landowner looked at what was being produced and knew that it was very good. As the second season drew to a close, the vintner and his wife sat on the porch of the estate house as the sun went down over the vineyard. The vines were tended, the books were balanced, the adjacent property was acquired and already producing its first harvest. The landowner's proposal had been exceeded in every measurable way. Neither of them spoke for a while. There wasn't much that needed to be said. The vintner looked out over what they had built together and felt something he hadn't felt until he had begun working for this landowner. Peace. A quiet, settled certainty that they were exactly where they were supposed to be, doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing, for a landowner who not only compensated them well, but genuinely loved them. They were blissfully content, the man and his wife. There are 2 biblical financial principles embedded in this story. The first can be found in Genesis chapter 2, when God says, "It is not good for the man to be alone." A wife was never intended to be her husband's assistant. Rather, she is to be his partner in God's plan. Deuteronomy 32:30 explains that 1 can chase 1,000 and 2 can put 10,000 to flight. That's a tenfold increase in power when 2 people work together toward a common objective. The second principle can be found in Ecclesiastes 4:12, which reads, "Though one may be overpowered by another, 2 can withstand him, and a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken." The 3 strands in this story are the husband, his wife, and the wealthy landowner. Next week, I'll reveal what happens when we step outside of God's financial blueprint. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss it. I'm Papa Charlie. Class dismissed.